they thought in a dry season was sort of a pivotal point in your Alan Banks series.
Well, it was, and it was a breakthrough in a number of ways. I mean, not just commercially, although it was that too, and in terms of sales, in terms of my profile in the UK, which was relatively low until that point. But also, I think for me as a writer, it was a breakthrough, because at that point it was either move on to standalones, do something else, you know, abandon Banks, or do something else with the kind of book that I was writing. And I think that was the point I really switched towards writing books about not just Banks, but you know, and his life as a policeman and just as a person. I mean, all that came into it. I think there's far more of his personal life in there, because it's the first book in which he's separated from his wife, for example. He's alone for the first time. But also to tell somebody else's story too. It was another era in that book, and say in Piece of My Heart there was another story set in 1969. And I try not to do it with every book. I mean, I don't want to get into the routine. I don't want this to become the norm and say, oh, I've got to break this mold and get somewhere else. But I return to it every once in a while, and I enjoy doing the research. I enjoy recreating a historical period. And I think it's also a nice break for me to find another voice to work with as well as Banks.
Plus you get to pursue your own interests, because the music one that you used when you went back to the festival, the rock festival, was something that really interested you. Our analog to it would be Woodstock, I'm supposing.
Well, over in the States it would. In England it would be the Isle of Wight, something like one of the big 69, 70 festivals. But yeah, I mean, it was a book that, you know, I'd always wanted to write about that era, because I grew up in that period and went to those places. But it's funny that I couldn't really do it until I wrote about it from the point of view of someone who disapproved of it all. And the voice in all the 1969 parts is a detective called Chadwick, who is having problems with his daughter. He hates the hippies, hates the music, hates the long hair, hates the whole thing. And only Banks, you know, 40 or some years later, is relatively sympathetic, looking back nostalgically, and of course loving the music. So it was odd that, you know, a period I wanted to write about, I had to wait till I somehow got a critical eye and enough distance to do it.
Well, I don't know. It was so much a part of your own life that, yeah, I think oftentimes to write something historical, I mean, I have learned an amazing amount about Vietnam, for example, which was a critical time in my life. I'm a Vietnam War widow. I graduated from Stanford just before it started, and I sort of deliberately avoided it while it was going on, because, you know, it was painful. And there's been so much written in the last 5 years, you know, looking into it in the same way that World War II has been, you know, facets of the war that nobody ever saw when it was happening have come out dramatically in, what, the last 10 years of all kinds of fiction.
Well, I think it's partly time, as you say. As your distance increases from it, you can look back on it perhaps a bit more objectively. You're not as involved. And I think also there's something to be said for, we're now in another century, you know, so all that was the 20th century. We're now in the 21st century. It somehow gives it the status of history, like the 19th century used to be. Now it's the 20th century. So we can compartmentalize it somehow and deal with it in a different way.
I think that's true. I also think that there are just a lot of sources that come to light that,
yeah.
you know, people have to die or not be so affected in their careers or whatever it is. And so you've got a lot of research material that just wasn't available to you when it was all going on.
Yeah.
I mean, there are two books out right at the moment. I was thinking one maybe they're both nonfiction. One's a novel, I can't be sure, about the role of Pius XII. And, you know, they call him, one of them is called Hitler's Pope, for example, talking about whether, in fact, the position of the Jews in Europe would have been different if he had taken a different stand, and other people saying, you know, but the only way he could manage to keep the Vatican intact and whatever it was to make a deal. And, you know, you can't really do that when it's happening.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I was just reading the recent Philip Kerr novel in that series of...
the one in Buenos Aires, the new one?
No, the one before that, One from the Other.
Okay, where he's after the war and he's now a private...
Yeah, it's 1949 in Munich. and the whole Roman Catholic Pope thing comes into that as well.
Well, we all learned about the Swiss and the bank accounts and all. And actually, I was saying today when I was writing up the new books coming out for next month, there's an absolute wave of stuff dealing with the new Russia. And I realized that all of a sudden Russia is coming back as something on the political scene to be feared. You know, we've all had nervous moments about what's going on. There's a lot of conflict and tension. Not everybody wants to write about the Middle East. China is kind of, doing the Olympics, so it's not as scary for the moment as it was because they, are trying not to excite world opinion. So all of a sudden we have this raft of books that are not the old Cold War thing, but rather a new look at East-West tensions, Chechnya, all that kind of thing.
You can never ignore Russia, and it's, all those years where after the breakup of the Soviet Union, people were thinking, oh, it's over, the wall's down, the Soviet Union's gone. But, if you look back over history, you can't ignore Russia.
So what got you from Britain to Canada, which is, after all, sort of a peaceful country at the moment, unless you go to war with your own indigenous populations?
Yeah, there's plenty of that. Education and just a desire to travel, really. I mean, I didn't intend to come permanently. I came to do a year's course, master's course, and then I was going to go back and find a job and work in the UK. And I was going to spend maybe a year traveling around North America.
Is that sort of gap year thing that you Brits are so fond of?
Yeah, I guess sort of. I mean, I was a bit older because I'd done my bachelor's degree. Usually you would do your gap year between school and starting university. But it's the same idea, yeah. I was going to take a year before I settled down to a lifetime of drudgery. And it didn't happen. I took more than a year, and I'm still here in North America. And I never did settle down to a lifetime of drudgery, so I guess I got lucky somewhere along the way.
When did you meet Sheila? Had you been here for a while?
Yeah, I'd been here for 10, 15 years.
Oh, I didn't realize it was so long.
But I mean, I've been back and forth a lot too. I mean, one of the things was that I never fully let go. I mean, I know a lot of people who've come from UK to Canada, people have gone to Australia, New Zealand, United States, and a lot of them have been very bitter about England, and that's why they've left. They haven't had the opportunities. They've come to the new world for new opportunities, and they don't want to know, that they won't go home. Or they have problems with their families, and they don't want to see their families again, or whatever. But I never had that. I never made a break, and I never thought I'd never want to go back. I hate it. I just came out of curiosity and ended up staying. And obviously I like it, or I wouldn't have done that. But I've always kept up my ties, and now have actually a flat in Richmond, North Yorkshire, where we spend a good, maybe not half the year, but probably about a third of the year.
It's beautiful there. That's Richard III country, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it certainly is. Yeah, it's has an old ruined castle on the hill, and in fact, Richmond was a sort of model for Eastvale in the Inspector Banks books, except that I made it a lot bigger in the books. I needed more crime, so I needed a bigger kind of environment. But the centre is very similar with the cobbled market square, the church, the castle, the river, very, very close. It's interesting to be living there now.
Well, your wife Sheila, whom I mentioned earlier but didn't say who she was, she has been a solicitor for all the time I've known her anyway in Canada. Is she now able to take breaks from her practice?
Oh yes, yes. Yeah, she likes to travel, and one of the things that was a problem working as a lawyer or as an Ontario Energy Board member, which she also was getting time off.
Right.
So she chooses her projects carefully now.